call this Planning Board public meeting to order. It's Tuesday, October 19, 2021. We're in the Village Hall courtroom. It's approximately 7:36 right now.
In accordance with the provisions of Section 10:4/8D of the Open Public Meetings Act, the date, location, and time of the commencement of this meeting is reflected in a meeting notice, a copy of which schedule has been filed with the village manager and the village clerk, the Ridgewood News and the Record newspapers, and posted on the bulletin board in the entry lobby of the village municipal offices at 131 North Maple Avenue and on the village website, all in accordance with the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act.
Please stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Mayor Newton,
Here.
Chief Ngor,
Here.
Councilwoman Reynolds,
Here.
Mr. Joel,
Here.
Ms. O'Brien,
Here.
Ms. Paturi, Ms. Huban,
Here.
Ms. Bartow,
Here.
Ms. Johnson, Mr. Lebarski,
Here.
Mr. Allegra.
Here.
Okay, thanks, Jane. All right, our first item on the agenda will be public comments on topics not pending before the board. Does anyone have any comments? Seeing there are none, we'll move on to the next item. Do you have any updates from any committees, commissions, or professionals?
Yeah, the Historic Preservation Commission met last week, voted for Joe Suplicki as the chair and Barbara Ferrante as the vice chair. We had 5 applications, 1 extension to a residential building, and the other 4 were in the commercial downtown for signs and awnings. And we also decided that the November meeting, we're going to do kind of a work session to work on the historic preservation element of the master plan so that we can get a draft done by the end of November.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? Okay. Do we have any correspondence, Jane?
No.
Okay. All right, our next item on the agenda will be discussion, Phase 2 Master Plan public meeting. And we have representatives from Higher Gruel and NB5. It's John Barry and Roshana Sheth. John, you have the floor.
Okay. Good evening. Is that loud enough?
Yep.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our second work session on the progress that we're undertaking with the master plan update. We're going to go through a few items this evening, beginning with a recap of our meeting from last month, just to go over some of the key points that we heard from the participation that we had last month. And then we're going to go through the four larger of the elements that we're updating and talk about some existing conditions analysis and some initial thoughts about potential recommendations. At this stage, they're more general kinds of recommendations. We're not quite to the specifics yet, but I'd certainly like to hear from everybody here which of those ideas make sense for Ridgewood and for your different perspectives. And then we'll get into just briefly the next steps, the schedule moving forward, and then open it up to comments, questions, and whatever anybody else would like to contribute. We do have a map in the back that, at your leisure, either during the meeting or on your way out, you can take a look at. There's some little sticker dots that you can place, and the idea here is to replicate a question that we posted online this morning, and it's to identify locations in town where you may have issues with pedestrian safety, bicycle safety, just general kind of traffic safety issues, to identify intersections or street segments that may pose issues. So you can put a sticker to identify them, you can write a post-it note to describe whatever the concern is, and like I said, that replicates the question that we posted online this morning that we've gotten some responses to. So some of the main takeaways from the September 21st meeting, and these are just in no order of preference or importance, just some general thoughts, are that flooding and resiliency are important considerations for the village. That meeting was fairly fresh in everybody's minds right after Ida, and certainly those issues linger and repeat themselves. Aging in place was raised as an issue, including housing options, walkability, pedestrian safety, and how those things impact people's ability to get around town and continue to live in the village. General issues of environmental sustainability. We heard a lot about tree canopy and trying to work to enhance what we have today, supplement. Recycling as a continued concern, both for residential and non-residential business uses. Reducing the heat island effect, so that plays back into the tree canopy idea. And then we heard a few specific recommendations about some concerns about issues with the ordinance, the land use and zoning ordinance. So we'll get into those in a little more detail as we move forward. And then we heard a good bit about open space and recreation, which is being handled through a parallel process. There'll be, we can certainly listen to comments on those issues, but that's being handled in large part, most part, by another consulting firm that's doing the update to the open space and recreation plan. Just a quick recap. I'll begin with a quick discussion of our existing conditions in the land use element. This is a repeat of the slide the first time, and we are making every effort to have the new slides have more pictures and larger text. And this presentation will be available after the meeting is concluded. So just a recap, the master plan, the land use element, requirements in the municipal land use law. There's discussion of a relationship between land use and other elements, natural features, existing and proposed land uses, and statements of strategy related to smart growth, environmental sustainability, and a climate change assessment. From the vision plan, just to repeat some of the things that we heard from the vision planning process and are continuing to inform us as we move forward, keeping that small town feel, continuing to be proactive with different community planning issues, and planning for the needs of current and future residents. So a few quick points of existing conditions in the review that I've conducted so far. And the vast majority of the town, as you're all well aware, is a residential neighborhoods, single-family homes on a variety of different sized lots. That's a good portion of the town. I have a breakdown on the next slide. There's really 4 commercial areas throughout town. We have the Central Business District is by far the largest. We have a little commercial strip on Goffle Road at the edge of town. We have a little commercial strip that's in more of a transitional state up on North Maple as we go into Hohokus. And then some little pockets on the east side of town along Route 17 and some of the other gateways to the village. Looking at the initial look, comparing the land use of parcels to what they're zoned for, there's really not much of a mismatch. By and large, what you have in town, the zoning matches what the uses are. There's a handful of parcels that are split zoned, meaning one tax lot has a zone boundary that runs through it, so it may be commercial in the front, residential in the back, or vice versa. There's a few areas in town where that's the case, but it's not really a predominant issue. And another point of analysis suggests that a lot of the residential zones do have a lot of undersized lots. So there's a few different main lot size thresholds with your residential zones. And depending on which zone you're in, there's a lot of lots in the 8,000 square foot range where they may need to be 10,000 or 12,000 square feet. So there's a little bit of a mismatch in terms of lot sizes compared to what's required. But for a largely built out place, that may not really be an issue in everyday life. Looking at, as part of the land use element, we take a little look at demographics, trends. Population over the last 60 years is almost virtually the same today as it was 60 years ago in town. There was a little spike in the 70s. Population was the high mark, at least at a 10-year mark was a little over 27,000 people in 1970, and at the new 2020 numbers were just under 26,000 residents, which is comparable to what it was in 1960. As far as development trends in town, we've seen a few new developments downtown that you're all aware of. We have some prominent multifamily construction that's taken place downtown. Aside from that, there really hasn't been a whole lot. There's been some recent single-family development permits, but a handful a year where you have some tear downs and new construction, maybe the occasional subdivision. But for the most part, the trend has been those recent multifamily developments, some of which are still under construction, and not a whole lot else has changed otherwise. So this map, the categories are too small to read at this scale, but just looking at the colors, the yellow is the existing residential areas at the 4-family or less category. This is based on taxation data. They call Mod 4 assessment records in the tax records. And it breaks things down by property class. The property class, the residential class 2 is 4-family or fewer. So that's, as you can see, just looking at the yellow, that's the vast majority of the village. I've colored the dark green, which represents public property. So it's either public facilities like where we sit this evening, parks, things of that nature. You can see the pockets of dark green that wind around the town. Downtown, you've got the mix of red and kind of the peach color. That's your commercial and apartments. Generally in the tax data, if you have a mixed-use building where there's commercial properties with residential units above them, those are generally coded in the Mod 4 as commercial. So you see downtown is largely that red color with a few little pockets of the peach. So that's our development pattern as it exists. About 74% of the village falls under the tax categories of the residential properties. And then the existing zoning, this is a simplified, consolidated zoning map that treats all of those residential zones that maybe the R110, the R125, the R1, the R2, treats all of those the same for this quick look. You can see that pattern of yellow basically corresponds to the existing land use pattern. It also grabs a lot of that green that you see. A lot of the properties that are in public ownership happen to be in residential zones today. Downtown, you see that red pattern repeat itself. The red is the B1 and B2 business districts that corresponds to those commercial properties we saw. The peachy color here again is the mixed-use districts and the apartment districts that tend to surround downtown. And then the blue represents some of the professional office districts that have a little bit different character from the heart of the central business district along Ridgewood Avenue and Franklin Avenue, where kind of surrounding that commercial core, you have professional offices, medical offices, things of that nature. And some of those have a more residential character in terms of their structure, but are old homes that are now occupied by professional businesses. So that's, I'm sure none of you who live here and know the town will find any of this to be a surprise, but it's a part of our due diligence in terms of setting the stage for what recommendations may come, is that these are the existing conditions from a land use perspective. I'm going to turn it over to Rachna now to discuss circulation, and then I will be back.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just stand there. I have notes. Thank you, everyone. So I just wanted to, as John said, we wanted to give you a refresher of what the circulation element usually entails. It's supposed to show you the relationship between circulation and the other elements, the location and types of facilities that relate to all modes of transportation, how to move people and goods, the existing and proposed locations of any public electric vehicle infrastructure in town, and basically figure out, present how to move people and goods through the village in a safe way. And the circulation element will overlap with the land use plan, the downtown plan, and the open space and recreation plan. Just wanted to highlight again some of the big concepts that came out of the vision plan. Consider ways to reduce vehicle traffic and address the need for parking, make streets safer to support and promote walking and cycling, and improve pedestrian and bicycle connections between key destinations and the village. Some of the specific recommendations talk towards how to prepare the village for innovations and technology trends, with electric scooters and multi-mobility, to focus on towards more complete streets, recommendations to make more walkable streets and an integrated bicycle and pedestrian network, how to address delivery and loading along some of the streets that we know are constrained in the downtown. And maybe the pandemic gave the village an opportunity to explore closing down of certain streets and using them for maybe pedestrian uses, maybe temporarily, maybe for a longer period of time. So I just wanted, this map shows you the overall roadway network by jurisdiction. So overall, the village of Ridgewood has sort of a loose grid of residential streets that are then connected, that have east-west and north-south connectors, and those are the lines in yellow, which are primarily county roads, which means that the village does have to work closely with the county to make any improvements along these roads. You have State Route 17 that intersects on the northeast section, and Ridgewood Avenue is basically the key connector, east-west connector there. Looking at transit, we have the Ridgewood train station that has the main line. Overall, the ridership at the average weekday boardings on the main line were 30,000 in 2019, and the 2020 numbers are much lower. At the Ridgewood station, we had about 1,700 average weekday boardings. And the main line connects to Secaucus and Hoboken, providing access to New York City. You have the Ridgewood bus terminal. There are multiple bus lines that connect to Port Authority, providing access to New York City. We have the Park and Ride right on the northeast corner near Route 17 that has a Short Line and Airbrook Limousine. And then, the pandemic also gave rise to things like Coach USA's custom bus routes, that people can utilize to get to the city. What we also did is looked at the crashes for the last 7 years, 2013 to 2019 in Ridgewood. So we had 3,138 crashes in the 7 years, which is equal to more than one crash every single day. Ridgewood, in general, over the years, the number of crashes in Ridgewood have been trending up compared to the rest of the state, where it has been trending down. So that is something that we do need to address. There were 2 fatalities and 12 severe injury crashes in the 7 years. A third of all the crashes, which you see the blue lines, actually overlaps with a lot of county roads. 8% of the crashes were on NJDOT road, which is Route 17, and then another 8% were on local roads. However, crash data is not complete. I mean, the data that is, 50% of the crashes do not have roadway jurisdiction data available. So, we have to look at this with a fine lens there. 20% of all crashes occurred in the dark. And more than double of that were pedestrian crashes that happened in the dark. So street lighting is something that does need to be looked into. Some of the key corridors where the crashes occurred were, Ridgewood, Franklin Avenue, and Maple Avenue, East Glen Avenue, and some of those intersections, as you can see, are where there's like a lot of, it's a hotspot. Looking at, so this map shows you crashes by crash types. So cyclists, pedestrians, and vehicular crashes. There were 108 pedestrians, or 4% of the crashes were pedestrians, and 38 cyclists were hit in the last 7 years. Looking at the overall trends, the pedestrian crashes have been trending slightly down, but the cyclist crashes have been going up. And most of the crash, there's a 50-50 split of whether the crash occurred at an intersection or away from the intersection. This map shows you where bicycle and pedestrian crashes occurred in the last 7 years. Both of the fatalities were pedestrian crashes, and one of them was on Franklin and Maple, and the second one was West Ridgewood and Washington Place, and they both happened in the dark. So pedestrian and cyclists are more vulnerable. 75% of bike and ped crashes resulted in some injury compared to just 27% of the vehicular crashes. What we also looked at were commuting patterns, how people move in and out of Ridgewood, workers move in and out of Ridgewood. Just over 1,000 people live and work in Ridgewood. Over 11,000 commute to Ridgewood for work, and then over 9,000 commute out. They live in Ridgewood but work outside the village. So that gives us a sense of how many people are, moving through the village in and out throughout the day. And taking it a step further, we looked at census data. I'm sorry, the text is really small here. I will make sure it's larger next time. Over 60% drove to work. 22% took public transit. Of the 60% that drove to work, 5% did carpool, so that's a good sign. And 11% worked from home. We had just about 3% of the workers 16 and above that walked to work, and 0.4% that biked to work. So about 3,000 people take public transit or walk or bike to work. These are some of the recommendations from the Central Bergen Bicycle and Pedestrian Plans. The dark red or orange lines are where bike lanes were recommended, which were Lincoln Avenue, West Ridgewood Avenue, and East Ridgewood Avenue. The yellow lines are where sharrows or shared lane markings were recommended. Monroe Street, Broad Street, Vandian, Spring, Ridgewood, Franklin, and Linwood. There was a recommendation to consider using the PSENG right-of-way for a greenway. And then the pink dots that you see are locations where there were high number of crashes or they were prioritized for pedestrian improvements, like adding crosswalks, adding curb ramps, just improving the crosswalk to continental striping. And then the purple, which you see primarily is along Franklin Turnpike, is to add sidewalks there and also connect to the park and ride up there. So having said that, I wanted to sort of go through some of the strategies in which you can make mobility, you can improve walking and biking in the village. Why do people walk or bike? It's to get to work, to go to school, but walking and biking is also cost effective. It costs $0 to walk somewhere, just $300 to get a bike, and versus sitting in a car, which would be over $8,000. And so these are some of the obstacles that make walking or biking difficult. So you have long crossings, there's low visibility, no crosswalk, poor lighting, speeding cars, busy roads with no locations to cross, and discontinued sidewalk, or a sidewalk that has a tripping hazard, or the top right picture where there's absolutely no sidewalk and you see the family walking in the shoulder. Some of the obstacles that really affect biking are no shoulder or narrow shoulder, just a poor roadway condition, and then Of course, high-speed traffic or high-speed roads or heavy traffic make it unsafe for certain cyclists to bike. How can we make walking safer? So crosswalks, curb ramps, adding curb extensions, they slow down cars. Providing a crossing refuge allows people in a wheelchair or with a stroller or just with low mobility to have a safe place to cross. Providing continuous sidewalks, provide two key destinations within neighborhoods to the downtown. Also adding like pedestrian crossing signs and signals and flashing beacons that alert motorists that there is pedestrian activity or cyclist activity. Improving lighting, trees and landscaping, benches, all of these help encourage people to walk and bike and also make it safer. And these are some of the facilities that you can add on road for biking. There's shared lane markings, bike lanes, a side path, protected bike lane that you would feel comfortable going with your child, and providing places for bikes to be parked. That's really important. And then some of the off-road improvements are greenways and trails and making sure that you have enough opportunities to cross from these off-road treatments. I wanted to just show you one simple example. So this is a street, let's say in Ridgewood, that has is a hotspot for crashes and has high speeding and heavy traffic. What are the things that you can do to make this safer and more inviting to walk and bike? So you could widen the sidewalks, you could add curb extensions, you could add landscaping, you could add speed bumps that force cars to slow down. And what that does is that it not only forces cars to slow down, it also deters these roads to be used as cut-through roads. Because if you're going to have curb extensions and speed bumps, it deters people from taking those roadways. And curb extensions minimize crossing distances and vehicle turning speeds. And yeah, so with that, I'm going to pass it back to John. Thank you.
Next, we'll touch on the downtown and economic development plan element. Again, just a quick overview. It's an optional element within the municipal land use law, and it's really a focus on the village downtown, but it's intertwined with everything else. It's land use, it's sustainability, it's circulation, it's all of those things, but with a special focus on downtown, with the idea of trying to promote sustained economic vitality. Some of the concepts from the vision plan that we'll continue to keep in mind as we go are to maintain the aesthetic quality and feeling of downtown, creating safe pedestrian environments, some of the techniques that Rashna just mentioned, improving communication between downtown interests, stakeholders, and residents, and considering alternatives to reduce car traffic and better manage our parking throughout the town. So over the last couple of weeks, particularly most of the day last Friday, which was an absolutely gorgeous day, great day to be walking around downtown, went and took an inventory of all of the businesses that you have downtown today. There's about 300 storefronts, give or take, depending on how you define certain storefronts. Some of them maybe double occupancy that I counted as one, but we'll say there's 300 storefronts about. Of those, you have about 172 that are not restaurants, so there's quite a few restaurants. There's a mix of retail goods, just all sorts of different retail goods downtown. You have boutiques, you have clothing stores, you have paint stores, you have all kinds of different stuff. Then you have what I classified as personal services. Those are things like barbershops and salons, nail places, spas, massage parlors. Retail services, things like tailors, cleaners, art studios, different things where it's, there's transactions, but you're not necessarily buying something. You're either it's an experiential kind of thing, or it's more of a service related to something you own. And then what I called office services, looking at travel agents, realtors, things like that. You have banks and you have grocery stores. So we have 3 grocery stores in and around downtown, which is an excellent amenity. I can't tell you how often I hear from different towns and different places how much they wish they could have a grocery store in their downtown. It's probably the most common desire for a lot of towns that don't have one. So having three different and valuable resources downtown like you do is a great starting point, certainly. And then looking at restaurants. I mean, Ridgewood's got incredible restaurants. I had a great lunch. But there are a wide variety of cuisine, about 90 or so different restaurants. You have 18 restaurants that break down into different Asian cuisines, sushi, Japanese, Chinese, Thai, Korean. You have kind of a general catch-all, 17 American contemporary restaurants. You have coffee shops, tea shops, bakeries, about 12 of those. You have different dessert places. So there's a real diversity of restaurant options downtown. All different range of things from very fancy high-end places to casual takeout. So it's a great asset to have and certainly an attractive presence downtown. So by my count, there are about 30 vacancies scattered throughout downtown. And some of those are things that are in transition. There's signs up with coming soon, so some of those are getting ready to turn over into a new business, and some remain vacant. So looking at different gaps and strategies that we can try and promote some activity in those places will be something we continue to do moving forward. Now, downtown has some really prominent key features that you're all familiar with. We have the train station that kind of separates our upper and lower, west and east. We have Memorial Park at Van Ness Square, which is a very prominent feature. Got outdoor dining that, of course, has become much more prominent as a result of the pandemic. But I saw a news article, I think it was from early 90s maybe, in my research, that claimed that Ridgewood was the first town in New Jersey to permit outdoor dining. I don't know about the veracity of that, but we could make that claim. Sure, why not? It was printed somewhere. We have our freshly constructed parking garage at Hudson Street, and we've got some great different storefronts along different corridors. You know, Willsey Street, Ridgewood Avenue. There's a lot of stuff going on, and like I said, last Friday, middle of the day, there were a lot of people out and about. It was very, very nice. It's a beautiful day. But we have some places that have kind of stand out as potential opportunity sites, and I know there's been conversation about these in the past, and part of what we're doing is to try and look at them through a fresh lens and see what may make sense moving forward for some of these properties. We've got the bus terminal and parking lot area right next to Van Ness Square. You know, that's the square itself is a lovely feature, and that property stands out as something that may be able to be reimagined and complement the square. We have the North Walnut Street redevelopment area that's been designated redevelopment area. There's a plan in place for it, but as we can see going by, no redevelopment has taken place yet. So there's some kind of pocked surface parking and the town garage building. There's some environmental constraints that limit the potential there in the short term, but that's a prominent piece of property certainly in the heart of the central business district. And what I've looked at, looking at this downtown economic development element through a lens of a kind of four-step process called SOAR. You may have heard of a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is similar, but a little more, meant to be a little more uplifting rather than focusing on weaknesses and threats. We're talking about strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. So kind of being proud of what we have already, which is a great, vibrant downtown, train station, restaurants, grocery stores, a variety of unique shops, Venice Square. Some of the opportunities that may present themselves, the parking garage is a relatively new addition, so in terms of how we experience and manage parking downtown moving forward, that's kind of a new trend to watch. We have the redevelopment area that I mentioned. We have an influx of new residents to downtown, which will bring with them activity, will bring with them additional income to spend on goods, services, and activities. And then some of the aspirations go along with what we've talked about. Pedestrian safety, trying to make the downtown as walkable and inviting and friendly as possible. Supporting existing businesses, attracting new businesses, looking at where there may be gaps in our uses, how to fill up those vacant storefronts and make sure that what's there continues to thrive. Looking at how to enhance and expand green spaces, building up the tree canopy, maintaining some of the assets that we have, and also continuing to soften and green where possible. That feeds into that pedestrian friendliness, making downtown an inviting place to come to, stay, hang around. Providing activities for people of all ages. If you're downtown on a school, especially Friday, I'm sure, afternoon, you'll see that there's children wandering around of all ages. So having activities for teenagers, having activities for adults, having activities for senior citizens, everybody in between and all around is certainly an aspiration. And then in terms of the results of how we get there, how do we keep an eye on our progress, looking at whether there's modifications to zoning that may be a step that help effectuate some of this, tracking as we have new businesses come in, seeing that number of vacant storefronts go down, and that's certainly a positive result. As the transportation network, looking at how the parking's managed, how people are using downtown, if there's walking, there's biking. As we build out and expand and enhance our public spaces, we'll see those improvements in action. And then all of that contributes to the vibrancy and activity downtown. So I give you this slide, just not that anybody should read this, but you certainly could if you were closer to it. But this is, when we talk about potential zoning issues or zoning barriers that may pose a challenge downtown, this is the text of the retail sales and services section in the existing zoning ordinance. And it is very specific. It's a very long list of things, very specific. But what it is in its specificity is it leaves out anything that's not within those categories. So we talked a little bit last time about trying to imagine flexibility as new uses become popular and come into existence. When you are at this level of specificity with this long list of things, it doesn't really give you that option to have some interpretation and see, does this use fit broadly in that category? Well, if it's not on that list, it doesn't. So that's something that we'll continue to discuss and explore. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit about the green building and environmental sustainability element. And this is, again, an optional element, but something that we understand is very important. We've heard much comment about from our discussions so far. And it really infuses itself into the whole world of planning these days, whether it's transportation planning or land use planning or anything else. Sustainability is kind of the key focus in a lot of ways. We're looking at efficient use of natural resources, whether that's energy efficiency, water management, renewable energy, impact of buildings. Buildings are a major energy user. They're a major, in terms of construction, there's a lot of pretty heavy carbon footprint depending on the type of construction. So looking at how we build buildings, how buildings operate, and how our ecosystem functions, conservation, and reuse of water, and so forth. General vision plan concepts, recommendations, creating a more sustainable community, preparing for severe weather and climate change, protecting and enhancing the tree canopy throughout the village, and generally being more proactive, as we discussed from the get-go. So some of the efforts that the village has undertaken, there's been a great deal of work put into the Sustainable Jersey Silver certification, which is the highest level offered today, and there's a lot of different activities that the village has undertaken to achieve that certification. There's a lot of annual or periodic events that take place with the recycling center in terms of different types of specialized recycling and shredding and things that are offered. There's the biogas project at the sewer treatment plant that's won some awards and is very widely regarded as an example of a best practice. There's the village ordinance that mandates the reduction in single-use plastic bags, which is something that is moving into being state law starting middle of next year. That'll be a statewide, so you're ahead of the curve there. I think the ordinance you have in place is pretty consistent with what the state will be doing. Along with that, there'll be a reduction in certain kinds of styrofoams that are typically used for food packaging and things like that. So the state's moving away from allowing those. We have the Bee City USA resolution that promotes plants to benefit pollinators. And then there's a few green building standards dealing mostly with lot and building orientation that are on the books today, which are a nice start on that front. So within the world of sustainability, there's all sorts of different things. And I broke down a few examples of best practices, concepts that we can discuss and evaluate as to their importance for Ridgewood. We have stormwater and flooding kinds of things. So you have small scale interventions like rain gardens that you may have in your own, on a small scale on your own piece of property. There could be a larger version of that as part of a commercial or public property. You have things like cisterns and rain barrels that can capture the water that comes out of your gutters, comes off your roof. That can be reused for watering vegetation, landscaping, gardens. You have bioswales, underground storage. Some of those are larger interventions that need to be constructed typically either as part of a big development or using some public funds. Green roofs, blue roofs, those are different types of roof materials that are intended to retain, capture, filter more storm water before it discharges and enters the system. It's a variety of different potential sustainable best practices related to stormwater management and flooding. In terms of waste management, there's you have your refuse stream, recycling, of course, to separate out as much as possible from what heads to the landfill. Some places are really pushing a lot of effort into composting and managing food waste and diverting that again from the landfill, starting to look at 3-stream waste disposal patterns as opposed to just your garbage and recycling. There's a lot of physical improvements in terms of infrastructure that could be available for, as part of a downtown strategy. These big belly garbage cans are something you see in certain places. They have compactors that are solar powered, so they have much greater capacity. They're contained so that you don't have issues with smell and things blowing around. And they have all sorts of potential fancy features. You can even integrate Wi-Fi hotspots into them now. And then there are some of the waste reduction things we talked about in terms of the plastic bags and styrofoam on a small scale, but then on a much larger scale, looking at how we deal with construction and demolition waste and how we can divert some of those streams from the landfill and reuse them nearby. Air quality and transportation is a big picture issue. This one can be a little harder to deal with locally just because it's so widespread, but our shade trees that come up again and again, they certainly help and deal with air quality issues. Some of the transportation considerations we were talking about in terms of shifting away from internal combustion engines as the more and more of our personal automobiles are electrified, and whether we see more electrification of heavy vehicles. That's something that garbage trucks and buses and things can not too distant future move in that direction, and promoting biking and walking as an alternative to try and keep our local emissions down. Energy, green building, some of these things that can be integrated into your land use ordinances in terms of promoting certain standards or requiring certain standards. Energy efficiency looks at building envelope, looks at heating, ventilation, air conditioning, occupancy sensors, smart control, all those different things. There's a variety of standards out there for measuring, certifying, qualifying buildings to a particular standard, LEED being the big, most common one. Passive house is another kind of interesting one that looks at particularly at insulation and how buildings are ventilated, heated, and cooled. Some municipalities have incorporated lengthy checklists of green building standards, requirements to incorporate a lot of these different features. That's something that we can discuss as a strategy. And then public health is a big part of sustainability as well. Promoting recreation and wellness activities in conjunction with our open space and recreation plan. Healthy buildings feeds into that green building concept. And then looking at sustainable housing options, which we've talked a little bit about as well. And then tying back into our downtown, we have promoting local businesses and the local economy as an example of something that we can do to be a more sustainable community. So that sums up our existing conditions review, I think. Our next steps here, the slide refers to a November work session, but I think we've decided in conversation with the committee that we'll be holding off on that session. We'll be moving that to January to give us some time over the next 2 months, 3 months to develop, really flesh out the recommendations. We don't want to come back here in 4 weeks without having a chance to give you something concrete. We've talked enough about the way things are now. It's time to put together the suite of recommendations and run those by you. So our next meeting in this context will be in January. In between, we'll continue to post updates on the website, post things out to social media, and we'll probably explore a few other ways to disseminate some information as we go. And we'll be talking to some stakeholders one-on-one and different village departments, different entities. And that'll get us through to that January, February period where we'll come back and really refine and review our recommendations with the continued goal of having a plan for adoption here before the board in March. So that sums up my end, and open up to questions and comments.
Okay, sure. We'll start with questions from the board first, then professionals, and then the public. So any board members have questions?
I do. I just wanted to, on what you were talking about from a circulation point of view, I noticed the stats in there were from 2019, right? So pre-pandemic, and I understand it's because it's what you have available, right? But just wanted to make sure as you guys are thinking through, right, how many people are going to work? Is it 2 or 3 days a week? Is that forever? I don't know, and who knows if it's going to change in a year or 2 or 3 down the road, but just making sure some of those recommendations, especially from a circulation perspective, because I was, quite frankly, I was shocked to see that 11,000 people were coming into Ridgewood each day and 9,000 were going out. I would have never guessed that was, I almost would have thought it would have been flip-flop, but even more so. So just making sure you're keeping those trends and what may happen as you think about the circulation and how many people are really here, because does it mean if you're going in 2 or 3 days a week that maybe you're running out to lunch more? So it may not be the morning rush hour per se. You may get more of a lunch rush hour and things like that. So just making sure you're kind of keeping that in mind as you're looking at circulation stuff. But I did notice the 2019, so thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Just jump in with questions.
Yeah, I have a question. The one slide that there's a suggestion that there's a desire to have a more walkable bicycle environment, and yet the slide that shows how many people use their vehicles, there's a complete and total disconnect on what people say they want And certainly walking and bicycling is something people can do. So it's surprising to me to see that disconnect. Do you have any idea why that would be? Or is it people just think that's a good idea, but in practice, it doesn't necessarily work?
That's a very good point. So people walk and bike, so remember the commuting.
You need to use your microphone, sorry.
The commuting numbers primarily focus on employed people, workers, the 16 and above. But there are a lot more reasons why people walk and bike, not necessarily to work. I mean, if you work in New York City, then you kind of are out of options. Or if you work in one of the neighboring towns or a different county. But people do walk and bike for recreation, and so my guess is that there is that desire sort of, or walking to downtown for on a weekend or in the evening, that's maybe where those numbers are coming from. This is census data, that talks about how people commute to work, and there is unfortunately a large number of people throughout New Jersey that do take their cars to work, and it is that the 3-4% is sort of the number for the state as well. It's sort of a chicken and egg situation. If there are more options to walk, if there are more safe ways to bike, I expect more people to bike and walk to work and to key destinations. Again, the census data will only really focus on the commuting for work numbers, not so much on other, like kids walking to work and biking to school, sorry. That's a good point, though.
So then I had a couple of other questions. Let me just see. Go back. I just said I have a few more questions, but I just was looking. Sorry, Rorik, I got it. Always remember, I'm going to speak up for you. So I wanted to go back to 2 items. It was the town garage slide and the bus station. So the bus station building is actually historic. I'm sure you're aware of that. And I was wondering, when you said that they could be repurposed and reimagined, in that space near a parking lot and in the proximity, there's a lot of interesting features to that as it relates to the church and the proximity to the war memorial. How do you see that, or what do you envision that as being reimagined as in your experience? How would that, do you have any thoughts on that?
So the closest similar thing that I can think of is in Princeton. I don't know if anybody's...
I can't hear you, John, sorry.
Sorry, there we go. The closest similar structure in a similar location that I can think of is in Princeton. There's a little kiosk that's about the same size, I'd say. That's right near Palmer Square on Nassau Street. So if anybody knows what I'm talking about, you can probably picture it by now. But it's a little convenience store, basically. Not that that's the right use there, but it's a similar size. So perhaps there's a vendor that could occupy that space. Hypothetically, I don't know if it would or wouldn't work there, but that's something that has been done and could be done with something that size. The bigger picture for that property is, I guess, a discussion of whether or not having parking there is the best use of that space adjacent to it, with its proximity and the prominence of the square there. Do we think about something else on that space that relates itself to the square? Because the thing about the square is that it's set up from Ridgewood Avenue, and it's kind of on a hump depending on how you look at it. But from that side on Van Nest, it's pretty level. So that's really the spot where you have the most direct relationship to what's happening inside the square. So it's a very, there should be a lot of potential for that. So I think, being open and creative about what could be is worthwhile.
So then, and my last question on that same potential opportunity sites, the town garage site, we're actually in an eminent domain process with anticipation of hopefully, I'm looking over at Councilwoman Perrin, who joined the meeting, welcome, the opportunity, because the village will own the entire property at that point as we proceed, envisioning a park in that space. And I didn't throw that into the mix because we were in the process of adopting an ordinance and doing everything, and because it's not reality yet, I just thought I wanted to put that there and ask, because you said that it was a potential opportunity site. Do you see that site as appropriate for the park that we envision being there? And it wouldn't, because we can configure it in any way we want, because we own then we would own all that property. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or were you suggesting that it was a more important property for commercial uses?
Well, I think it could go either way. It's a large chunk of property that's right there. So the Ridgewood Avenue corridor is certainly your more prominent outward-facing retail storefronts. The Franklin Avenue is a little more vehicle-oriented, a little less pedestrian-oriented. A park there could help shift that dynamic a little bit, certainly. That bleeds into our open space and recreation plan as well, so as far as what the actual design of it is, I don't know. But I think that there's commercial potential because of where it's located, but there's also, it could be a valuable addition to that open space, and then you can connect throughout town along that green spine through things.
Yeah, for us, it seems like logical because we have more and more folks moving into the new multifamily housing location, so that secondary park there.
Yeah.
I'm going to just let everyone else jump in, and I'll have a couple more questions.
John, I was wondering about the existing zoning. It's kind of restrictive for business. How do towns handle that? Not given an open, thing just for any type of business. How do you restrict it to the businesses that you want, yet provide opportunity?
Yeah, that can certainly be a challenge, because it's hard to anticipate every eventuality. So that's the hard part about leaving things open-ended. If you have very specific things that you do not want, you can give yourself an open-ended permission and then prohibit some things within that. That's the trade-off. If you want to build in flexibility and have some interpretation left in the hands of a zoning officer or somebody like that, you are putting a little bit of faith that you're going to, by the nature of Ridgewood, you're going to attract things that fit. It's something we need to think about and talk about. But I can offer some examples from other places, and we can look at what the results have been and whether one model or another makes the most sense.
Roshana, the curb extensions and striping, are those pretty economical to implement in areas?
So you can have...
Oop, Mike.
What I didn't show was you could also have a painted version of it, which would be a low cost. So the built curb extensions are expensive, but the painted version, which if anyone's ever visited Hoboken, you can put bollards, stripe it out, and it has the same effect as a curb extension would have. So you could make it a two-step process. Try out a painted version, and then if it really helps with speeding and reduction of crashes, then you could build it out.
Yeah, I do like the information you had on the accidents and everything like that. It kind of opens your eyes up to it and steer clear of the busy roads, I guess, as a pedestrian. But it's very interesting for that. So, we'll be looking for input to just make it safer for people. I thought that was very important. John, how about water conservation? What things come to mind for that?
Yeah, so in terms of irrigating landscaping, which is a major use, you could plant certain things that require less maintenance, less watering. There's the cisterns and rain and barrels for catching the roof runoff that can then be used for that kind of landscape irrigation. So those are some kind of fairly simple ways to reduce the water you may use to maintain a lawn or something of that nature. Then within building designs, there are the fixtures and feature the fixtures themselves. You can use a lower flow or the water sense models, which are pretty common these days, are more efficient uses of water. You can have smart metering for water that would be something you'd build in to the structure itself. Those are a few things off the top of my head, but there's a lot of that's in terms of the building design, and you could incorporate in an ordinance a green building checklist where you would have require a demonstration of how those things are being, a particular standards being met or a particular targets being met.
Are those things that are super expensive, or are they kind of can be worked into the construction pretty easily?
I mean, depends on what it is. A lot of the water sense fixtures at this point are pretty standard. They're kind of the baseline that's required for certain types of tax credit financing. For instance, you have to hit building efficiencies levels. So those types of things are probably happening as a matter of course. There may be some interventions that may cost a little more. They may be the kind of thing where the life cycle cost of it breaks even, but it's more upfront. Water is relatively inexpensive today, at least. But looking forward, it's easier to quantify some of those energy efficiency things because the price of energy is a little more in your face, and spending more upfront to save on your energy bill every month, you can kind of see those savings accumulate. The water may be a little bit trickier to visualize.
Okay.
I have a comment about, or a question actually, about the drafting process. So you'll obviously provide the first draft of the plan. What is the process for the board, its experts, to get their thoughts and comments? Are we redlining this document? Are we doing it at a public forum? Could you just explain, because in my view, I'd like to take it and kind of, go at it with a red pen, but could you just maybe describe how that would really work in practice?
So as far as that process works, I think it's really up to your board, your committee, as to how you would like it to work. We talked about having the initial recommendations meeting in January, where we would do a presentation of our initial thoughts, and we could share that ahead of the meeting to give everybody a time to prepare. And then with the goal of having a draft circulated for discussion at the February meeting. If you want to have a period in which we have written comments back and forth, I would leave that to the board committee to determine what the best approach is.
My approach would be to have that draft and go ahead and let folks redline it, and I guess initial on their red line, so that I don't think anybody has the same initials, hopefully not, right? So that everyone can have their input, and then the committee can review those red lines. And does that, is Rashonda, shaking her head, is that a good idea or a bad idea?
Oh yeah, no, that is a good idea. I wanted to ask, have you had a success with using like a shared file so that you can see all the edits all at once? And whoever logs in, you have their initials, like it's easier to track.
Yeah.
Has that been something that can work, or should we think about it?
I think we'll just have to figure out how that's going to work, but I think it's something that we should do, so we'll make it, if we should do it, we should make it doable, right? Okay, good.
Yeah, and then the follow-up is, after we've all gotten our chance to comment, the experts, our town experts have gotten a chance, I assume that the public will then get a chance to look at our comments, and then there'll be 1 or 2 additional meetings with public comment before we vote on it. Is that how it works?
I would imagine so. I think that's, again, it's a best practice.
Yeah, so we would have the initial draft that would be in advance of that February meeting, at which point everybody would be able to offer comments on it. If we're targeting the March meeting for an adoption, we need a period in there to act on those revisions. I don't know if it's a meeting in between or if it's just an open public comment period where we can collect feedback based on the outcome of that meeting and the comments that have come from the board and its professionals to that point. But we can evaluate the best way to do that as we get closer to that point.
Thank you.
I just have a quick comment, thank you. On the slide where you had the accidents, I just had a question in my memory, I don't know. Was there a fatality at the corner of Maple and East Ridgewood Avenue? Like right around Mother's Day a few years ago? Wasn't it a young man?
Yeah, Chris is shaking his head.
2017, wasn't it?
So that somehow didn't make it into East Ridgewood Avenue and Maple, North Maple.
I think
guess.
the deceased was on South Maple, just past the Ridgewood Avenue. It was on Mother's Day, but I think it might be out of the time frame that they looked at. It's been quite a number of years.
2013 to 2019?
I mean, we can check on the date, but
Okay,
Jay, Chuck, and I remember that one.
okay.
And we also had one on North Walnut Street. That ended up in some litigation and so forth. And there's been a couple here and there, unfortunately.
Okay. No, I just wanted to make sure that it was accurate. And then going back to the mayor's comment about the disparity between, people saying they want bike lanes and actual people riding bikes, I do think it's a matter of safety. I think it's kind of, if you build it, they will come, because currently, I don't think bicycle riders feel that it's safe. But if we build the bike lanes, I think they would come. But that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, any further board questions?
I have a couple more questions. So I'm officially not the green person in the village, but I do have a question. The chairman had asked about the water conservation, the types of plants, and the plants that you're describing actually use less water. That's conservation. So if they're, and again, I'm not the green person. I'm just not the green thumb here. So I'm going to apologize to anyone if this sounds a little out there. But if those plants are taking less water, presumably they're absorbing less water into the root system, they don't require more water, does that then create a greater flooding impact? Does that make sense?
I know what you're asking.
Okay.
I am not a horticulturalist myself, but my understanding is that some of the most intensive plants in terms of maintenance are just simple turf lawn. I mean, they demand a lot of water. If you want to keep a nice green lawn, you have to water it. So replacing or supplementing your turf grass with other plants that may be able to just sustain themselves naturally will offset some of that water use. But at the same time, turf lawn doesn't have a very deep root structure. You pull grass up, it's right there. So it's not going down deep, it's not drawing moisture in, really. It's just kind of constantly thirsty. So I think with some of those plants, you have more of a deep root structure that while they don't need as much water to live and sustain themselves, they're able to kind of retain more of it as they go and make the soil more stable with their deeper root structures. And that's kind of a simplistic form, and there's all different plants with all different characteristics, but that's one version of that idea.
And I just wanted to comment about the the pedestrian stripes. I just wanted to say, a couple of weeks ago, we had a Beetle event, I forget what it was called. Beetle event. It was a Beatles event. And at the location the event was held by our Ridgewood Arts Council, they had painted the stripes to replicate Abbey Road. And when I saw that, I actually felt it was safer. There was something about that visual stripes that made me actually feel like I wanted to keep it there because it felt just psychologically safer. It was only chalk, so it's not there any longer. But when I see this looks safer to me than those two parallel lines running across the street. It's more visual for the vehicles and more visual for the pedestrians. So I think this is something, and this is like low-hanging fruit, I think. It's so easy to do. I almost feel like,
We have this in us, I think some places, if I'm not mistaken. Do we have this across Bogart Ave at Glen, at the Cambridge-Bogart entrance?
We have a couple different styles of crosswalk markings. We have the CBD style where we use the red that we implemented about 9 years ago. I figure probably in about another 8 or 10 years, we're going to switch to something else.
Yeah.
And the reason being is we went with that to, as the mayor said, jar the motorist's memory. But over time, over 15, 20 years, that memory muscle gets very flaccid. So we need to come up with something more. Other places, as you see, we use the white striping. We can make just a single, 2 lines. We can fill them in. We can cross-hatch them. There's a couple different techniques we use. We have to keep trying to change it up so people say, oh, there's something new. I better pay attention.
We used, I believe, that kind of, but with some iridescent paint, some paint that had
yeah, the reflective.
the reflective paint.
All thermoplastic, we use thermoplastic
Has a
predominantly.
reflection.
We do use some paint, you're correct on that. But the thermoplastic, when it's nice and hot, very fine ground glass is sprinkled on it. That gives it a reflective material. Over time, the thermoplastic does get a little worn. It does get a little bit slicker.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just know I've seen those, and they're helpful at school crossings at times, I noticed.
So, and then I had one last question. On those, those are speed bumps in that, right? But they're kind of set back away from the cross. Do you recommend portable speed bumps? And I'm asking because we get requests all the time. I think Chris can shake his head if I'm, no, he doesn't want to hear it. We get requests often for speed bumps. And I'm a big believer in speed bumps, and I'm always kind of going, well, can't we just get portable speed bumps? And they don't have to be permanent, and they get the plow issues and the cars coming fast and kind of bumping over. But do you recommend portable speed bumps at all to be implemented as a strategy? You know, coming and going, people anticipate at some point speed bumps will be there. Is that something?
Remove them in the snow?
Because the speed bumps you're showing, I don't know what those are. Are those permanent? That's what I'm looking
Yeah,
at.
those are permanent. They just have the brake there for cyclists to go through. But yeah, no, those are permanent speed bumps.
Oh, so those are supposed to be permanent?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so those cuts in there are just so the bicycle can, got it,
Yeah.
okay, all right. Oh, it's
Mayor,
on, I don't, what,
Mayor,
it is slide, I guess it's page 28, if somebody wants to. Oh, you can't go back and look at it, they can't control their screens.
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
Mayor, can I say, I know what those are. Those are speed cushions, actually, which are very, that's a hybrid. What they are is they're split, as the planner was saying, that you can allow bicycles to go through, but also for safety reasons for emergency vehicles. They are spaced enough so the emergency vehicle's wheels can go through. So say an ambulance is rushing to a hospital or something, they don't hit the bump. They go right through. It's wider for that.
That, you know, it's funny because I was do you want to just for the record introduce yourself because
Oh,
I know
sure.
you're here for CME.
For the record, I'm Ron Reinertsen, Reinertsen. I am the planner, pinch hitter planner tonight for CME Associates. for Mary Ann, and it's a pleasure to be here. But we had speed bumps put in where I live on a street that for years was a notorious accident prone, because speeders would come in. It was a long stretch between lights, and the fire department and the ambulance folks didn't want to have the bumps there, so they came up with the speed cushions. Now, I have not done any studies, but I would say I have not heard of a serious accident since they put them in. So, you know, there's different techniques.
Did they patent them, I wonder? So, so a vehicle, so an emergency, an ambulance, an emergency vehicle can go right through there. So I guess then theoretically a car could do the same, but a car's not, I guess it's.
I've experienced most cars don't really know what to do with, so they do slow down, so that does serve the purpose. But at the same time, they don't act like anti-personnel devices where you don't see it and all of a sudden you hit the bump and you're cursing because your shocks went. But in all seriousness, that, you know, these particular ones work. I know I have a smaller car, which I go slower. My minivan has a spread, so I can go over them, but I'm certainly not going to go over them 35 miles an hour and risk ripping the bottom of my car out.
But they're
definitely
but they're
force-
intended to be permanent, like as part of the, okay, understood.
But they do force you to slow down, no matter what, whichever
it.
vehicle.
Interesting,
Any
okay.
other questions from the board?
Yes, a quick question. Thank you very much for bringing up some of the ideas regarding the flooding prevention that I brought up last time, just for
Your
me.
mic.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much again for bringing up some of the ideas for the flooding prevention. That's, for me, it's one of the topics that's of a big concern, just because of how many people got affected from the last storm and how many, God forbid, will be affected in the future. So some of the ideas I just wanted to get a little bit more information on down the line. For example, things like underground storage. Again, I'm a newbie to this. I don't really know much about these kinds of systems, but I just was wondering if, for example, something like an underground storage, that water could be used in the future for water irrigation of certain areas. I don't know if that kind of recycling of water could ever be implemented. I'm asking professionals who would know something like this, along the lines of, for example, the fields that we have. I've talked to so many parents, including myself. On Sunday, we couldn't play sports on one of the fields because on the day before, it rained heavily. This was last weekend. And again, water has nowhere to go. And again, it affects everybody's lifestyle, whether it's the kids, whether it's adults playing, whether it's the damages to the fields that have to later be repaired from taxpayer funds. So I just wanted to kind of along the lines of the flooding, just because that's of a big concern for me. So as we're planning further down the line, whether it's the underground storage, as you said, is very useful, I believe in Jersey City you mentioned, just those kind of ideas to start being implemented down the line.
Yeah, the last time we talked a little bit about some of what they've done in Hoboken, and those are big underground storage systems. And you know, in Hoboken, there's really nowhere for the water to go. You know, they're expensive. It's a big investment, so it's something that would need to be heavily weighed. I'm not familiar with that type of underground storage then being used for irrigation. I don't know. I don't want to say that's impossible, but I'm not familiar with that method, because typically after it's underground, then you release it underground. It doesn't come back up again. But you know, some of the smaller systems that I talked about in terms of the rain barrels that you might have at your house, or a cistern on a larger scale that might be on a commercial or public building, those can capture the water that usually it's the water that hits the roof and then goes into a gutter downspout system, and is, instead of sheet flowing or instead of going into a stormwater system, it gets stored in a tank, and then you can use it for irrigation or something else. You know, that can be on a very small scale in your yard. It could be on a larger scale elsewhere. So there's different options, and we can get into more detail with specific examples of those as we come back.
Any further questions?
Yes, I have one more.
Yep.
On the, I think you said there were roughly 30 vacancies downtown. In terms of percentages, how do you think that compares to other similarly situated central business districts?
So I was trying to answer that very question because I thought it would be an interesting one. Because of where we are in the cycle of the pandemic, let's say, I think it's hard to say. The data, a lot of the data is a little old, and it doesn't reflect what may have happened over the last year or 18 months. I saw some data saying that, that vacancies, and a lot of the data I saw too, I was trying to find around this area, was looking at more at malls and commercial strip kind of things, which aren't really the same. I couldn't find anything I thought was a good analog. Anecdotally, it's not bad, just based on other places I go, other places I see, without having done the same level of inventory recently anywhere else. Well, we did do one recently. It was in Roadway, which is not really a similar place, but there were more vacancies by percentage there. So I think there's always going to be a certain amount of transitional space. Things will come and go. I think it's maybe getting a little more insight on whether we have specific problem storefronts, we'll say, where it's always vacant or it's always going out or coming in, and why. Is it? I mean, maybe the landlord's a jerk. Maybe the rent's too high. There could be simple reasons like that. But there could be other things about this is a really bad corner or a bad stretch of road because it's some of those circulation issues rear their heads right there. So trying to understand a little bit about whether there's chronic vacancy in a specific place rather than a moment in time in the middle of a pandemic.
So for some of those that are more chronically vacant, just one last question. Do you have any experience with empty storefront display ordinances that would require a vacancy to have some visual interest in their storefront instead of being covered with craft paper and a red for rent sign that I know there are areas that do that. Do you have any experience with that? And do you have any samples of any such ordinances?
I will have to get back to you with a specific example. I'm trying to think. I have seen it, and I've seen it in action too in a redevelopment area, which is a little different, where it was an area that was very much kind of trying to turn over, and that was in Newark, so not really super relevant, but the mechanism is the same. I'll find something.
Yeah, so it kind of mitigates that broken window syndrome?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? We have 26 current retail spaces, from what the chart had said. And then I went too quick and I didn't catch all the exact specific numbers, but it's 73, go ahead.
Slide 31, page
Oh, slide
31,
there.
just so everyone can switch it to you.
73 retail
There we go.
goods
There
and
you go.
services. Okay, so 44 personal service, and then retail services was 26. So where were we with the retail goods? Okay, what things are you seeing? So I know you said our list we had this long list of things that were allowed, and it was sort of bulky. I know Rich had just asked about that as well. What are some things that other places are finding fill those spaces that retail is not filling? And I mean, I know that's probably too big of a list to rattle off right now. We had just revisited those uses over the last couple of years. We took haberdasheries out and, added in more relevant, items in there. But what are some other things other places are implementing that will fill those fronts that aren't coming back with retail?
That's the big question, right? What's out there that you don't have right now and that you can attract. You see, depending on where you are, you see some more kind of experiential types of things. I mean, you don't have a brewery or a distillery or anything like that in town, which has become much more commonplace and are pretty much popular across the board. So that's one thing that's not on the list. That's part of our work moving forward is to come up with more of those types of things. Because a lot of the storefronts, you have a mix. You have some of the buildings have really interesting configurations where you're at street level, but then you have this whole lower level that may be out behind on the parking lot that could lend itself to all sorts of potentially creative things. That particular configuration may lend itself very nicely to a brewery where you can have your kind of more industrial scale part of the operation tucked away, and then you have your more fun forward-facing part of the operation right there at street level. So, look, because there are some potential challenges with those spaces. If you have what's effectively only half the space is good retail space, but you're saddled with all that other square footage that somebody's got to do something with. Thinking about how that behind-the-scenes space may function is an interesting thought.
Thank you.
I have a question kind of related. So, being that so many people are working from home now, I don't believe that the Central Business District permits offices on the first floor. But are you seeing towns beginning to permit things like a WeWork or a Regus, which is just strictly office space, but it would be something that the residents could use if they don't have a home office or they just want to get away from, the kids? We've got one space in town already, but I think it's not pure office, which is why it was approved. Is that something you would consider recommending in the master plan?
Yeah, I think looking at that in a limited way might be an interesting thing to do. That Serendipity Labs, I think it's called, is the one you're referring to, right across from the train station there. That kind of use is definitely, especially as we see what happens with some of the larger office tenants in Manhattan and elsewhere. If they decide to start breaking that up a little bit, and there may be demand for little satellite spaces, or whether, like you said, it's just a space where people need to get out of the house for a few hours. So if you create those spaces where they're a combination of workspace that can also be something else after hours, whether it's some other kind of gathering space in the evening, or it's got a coffee shop component, or something along those lines where it's got a flexibility to it, where it's not just this is a 9-to-5 office. That kind of thing can provide activity throughout the day and evening potentially.
Sorry, I have one other question. And it came to mind as we were talking about flooding and Ida and whatnot. So, part of the beauty of our town that I think has been brought up by fellow board members as well as the public is the beauty of the trees in our community. Sometimes, obviously, during storms, those trees come down, right, on power lines and whatnot. Have you ever worked on something, and again, I'm going to smile because I know this is not an easy task, but, where we partner with, PSE&G and over the next X amount of years, try to move power lines. And again, like, I'm smiling because I know this is a huge endeavor, but has there ever been anything as part of a master plan where some of those power lines go underground, or as new construction happens, or as new buildings happen? Again, during every storm, you see people, oh, we're out here, we're out here, we're out here, because of trees or branches or whatnot. And just curious if that's ever been part of what you guys do. And I know that's a big question, but I and again, it's a huge expense, I understand that, but I'm just wondering if that's part of the fabric of your community, because as beautiful as your picture was at the Crossway, what I was missing was the telephone poles and the wire and things like that in your beautiful rendering. So it's just a question. Have you ever worked on that, or has there been a town, again, and being green and being this and being whatever, all those other things that have kind of worked on some of that? Just a question.
Sure. Well, I'm certainly familiar with requirements to have new utilities installed underground. I mean, that's pretty common in a lot of places. As to the big picture question, now's the time to think big. We can make that recommendation. That's certainly an endeavor that goes beyond the village itself, beyond what the the town can do on its own. But if you don't ever talk about it and don't ever ask for it and don't ever put it out there in your goals and your vision and your strategies, then you never get the conversation going. So I don't want to sit here and tell you it's going to happen, but I think that putting it in as a aspiration for the future and something that you'd want to work toward, then you start thinking about it.
I mean, the president of my company calls that the moonshot. So what's the moonshot?
Yeah,
Because
well.
we've all looked at, telephone poles by our house where it's like you once had Cablevision, now there's Fios, but the wire's still there and it's
Right.
still hanging and they're unsightly, and when trees come down, it's a problem for the community. So.
Okay. All right, do our professionals have any questions for?
None at this time, thank you.
Looking at the clock, and since I contributed to the speed cushion discussion, I'm going to yield to the, before I yield to the public, just one thing, the pandemic has shook a lot of foundations on concepts that we wouldn't even think 2 years ago. It's a challenge to the village, it's a challenge to planners. Quite frankly, I think post-pandemic planning is something that we need to keep in mind and keep an open mind, because there's a lot of businesses that have just popped out of nowhere to fill a need for Grubhub and these other things. And psychologically, we just have to realize how it's affected people. There's a lot of people who just don't want to take mass transit anymore for a while. So we have to accommodate that. So I just think as you go forward in going with the plan, to be flexible enough to be able to offer solutions to people who, quite frankly, are still hurting from this pandemic. And their voices need to be heard. So with that, I thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Ron. All right, anyone from the public want to come forth? You can come to the lectern, just state your name and address, and then you can ask away.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for that presentation. It was very informative. My name is Beth Gold-Cruller. I live at 719 Belmont. I'm a pretty recent resident to Ridgewood. I've been here 3 years, but I intend to make it my home for quite some time. I work in the field of sustainability, climate, and energy risk at a very macro level. So I had just 2 questions about the plan development, because this is a new process for me, and then one kind of general comment. My first question is around stakeholder management. So you mentioned stakeholder management, and the discussions seem to be very inwardly focused, stakeholders obviously within the town, within the government, but how do we speak to communities around us? Because when you talk about some of these very strategic, forward-thinking initiatives, water management, for instance, transportation, we don't live in a bubble. We can't make our own decisions without concerning the actions of other towns. They may not have their intended outcomes if we don't consider that. So how do we liaise with the other communities to understand how your recommendations might play out?
So part of the process is to look at what the surrounding towns have done. At this stage, I'd have to discuss with the board and the committee about an approach, but we have not talked about any direct communication with leaders in the neighboring towns. Unfortunate reality of New Jersey planning is that each town does control its own fate in some ways, in many ways. So the master plan process is really, it does have to take a look at the neighboring towns, what their land use is, what they're up to in terms of the things around the borders, and maybe whether there's transportation or other infrastructure that is crucial that crosses town lines that needs to be looked at holistically. I don't know that we have any plans right now to speak directly with the leaders of any of the neighboring towns.
Okay. Another question, I shared your comment on the commuter data. It's 2019, it's stale. I know it's evolving. I take public transit. I go 3 days a week. I don't know what everyone else is doing. But when I think about the historic data, that's one data point. But do you take advantage of the modeling tools that exist to be forward-thinking And I'm thinking more in terms of sustainability. I know this is the optional portion of the plan, right? But there are models that exist right now where you can age your infrastructure and age your town and think about what the physical landscape will look like. We're experiencing peaks and valleys in temperature. We're experiencing extreme weather events. Those tools do exist to allow you to look, 10, 15, 20 years into the future around a specific scenario that's likely to happen. Is that kind of data incorporated when you think about this plan because it is so strategic and long-lived?
In terms of the land use element, there's a recent requirement to do the climate change assessment as a component of that. To that end, NJDEP has made certain resources available that look at a lot of them have to do with sea level rise, so it's more of a coastal issue, but it does look at projections for future flooding. So that's a component of what we're going to be looking at on that front. If you have other specific tools that you're aware of in your research and your work, I'd be happy to hear about them. Because frankly, you may know more about this than anyone else in the room. So please share your.
I don't think that's the case. No, but
please do share your knowledge.
Well, the one comment I had, I don't know if it's really a question or a comment. Again, very macro is how I view things. And I have in my mind, the updated World Energy Outlook was published by the IEA recently, and they talk about the energy stack. And you mentioned energy use, renewable energy, and I saw the data point on solar. That's very tiny when you think about our energy use. And when you think about the technology that exists with solar, it's not going to solve renewable energy problems by any means. There's a whole lot of other factors there. So I kind of feel like there should be a caveat. I know it's the optional section, but under the sustainability section, I feel like there should be a caveat for evolving technologies. I loved your point about suiting the changing needs that we have and taking those opportunities under consideration. There's so many different technologies evolving in that space right now, and I think that, I know it's the optional section, but there's a lot of emerging technologies that maybe not exist today that we want to take advantage of 5, 10, 15 years in the future. So it's just like a comment. But,
no, that's great. And the comment about it being an optional section is that it is optional in the law, but it is not optional in our process. We are very much undertaking it, and it's a very important part of the master plan that will come out of this process. So don't take that optional the wrong way.
thank you.
So while Mr. Hallaby's coming to the microphone, I had just a quick question, Rorik. Sorry, I don't mean to take up your time. But to Beth's point, I just wanted to ask a quick question. Our master plan is more than 3 decades old. So in terms of the question, how it would be applied, and then I guess the bigger plan of adjacent or surrounding municipalities, would it be wrong to say that, for me personally, I envision surrounding municipalities using this document to model after as they're moving forward into their process, because this undertaking has been tremendous, and it just happened that we were in the middle of a pandemic as we were meeting and going through this, and so we were able to incorporate that information into this product. So is this something that surrounding municipalities will take and then look at it and model after?
There's a lot of borrowing and looking at what your neighbors do in this business, I think. So assuming that we do a good job and that you're happy with it, I would hope that some of your neighbors may be inspired by some of the things in the plan. And yeah, it could very well turn out that as those towns cyclically update their documents, that they look to Ridgewood and say, look at what Ridgewood did. This is a great idea. We want to do that in our town. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, I concur. It's you can say borrowing. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel a lot of times, but we rely on each other for good ideas. And so if this serves as a model for other municipalities surrounding, that's great. I mean, that moves the ball forward. So.
Sorry about that, Rorik.
Okay, go ahead. You can just state your name.
Rorik Hallaby, 1 Franklin Avenue, 52-year resident of Ridgewood. Proud resident of Ridgewood, a person who cares about Ridgewood, which is why I continue being a troublemaker. We recently moved to the Benjamin, and we're very, very happy with that. It's a great move for my wife and me to stay in town. As you can imagine, the apartments were fought tooth and nail by people fighting change. And that's the best thing that's happened to the downtown area. When you think of the Benjamin, with a beautiful building, so useful building, that's doing so much of the downtown area, replacing a boarded up circa 1950 car dealership. And to those who fight change, I say, would you rather have one or the other? The answer is very simple. Anyway, just without getting too serious, let me first amuse you by talking about Ridgewood being the first to have outdoor dining. That happened in the 70s, I believe. And there was a big debate because one of the Luddites, as I call them, was fighting change, said, how could you have outdoor dining? What if you're eating and the bird flew over and the bird did its thing right on top of your plate? I mean, you have to listen to everyone. But just an amazing story. Now, to be serious for a second, I'd love to see Ridgewood compared to towns of similar socioeconomic status within Ridgewood, within New Jersey and outside of New Jersey. In the last couple of months, we've had a reason to go to Westwood. Westwood is only 5-6 miles away from here. And it hurts me to say that, but downtown Ridgewood looks like a dump compared to Westwood. Downtown Westwood has maybe 5 or 4 vacancies. A vital, vital downtown. And for the record, they still have parking meters, 25 cents an hour, not $1.25 an hour. I would love you to do a study. What it is they're doing that's different from ours? What it is that Bronxville does? And Bronxville has lots of high density housing, if you will. But I think you owe it to us, because the problem with Ridgewood, and I'm listening to the lady who was very, very articulate, the problem with Ridgewood is that we think of ourselves as being a Camelot that's surrounded by this ocean. We're by ourselves, we're not. So anything you might do in that regard would be tremendous. Now, as far as crossings, one of the problems I have with the crossings in Ridgewood, I'm a big walker. I used to bicycle, but I tell you, I would not bicycle in Ridgewood if you paid me. I mean, it's very, very unsafe. And yes, you put bike lanes and you ensure safety, and people will start biking. The crossings, I'd like to see uniformity. Sometimes they're 2 lines, sometimes they're crosshatched. There must be some state rules as to what you do for crossings. Now, the ones that the Beatles crossed, this is London. They're called zebra crossings. And the minute you step off the sidewalk onto a zebra crossing, everybody comes to a halt. As I'm sure you know. But we don't have that here. Now, one last thing I'd like to mention is that this is a meeting of the planning board, not the village council. So I assume, Mr. Joel, that the members of the village council who sit on the planning board are ex officio members. I might be using the wrong term, and Mr. Wellinghorst could maybe correct me if I'm wrong. And I really think ex officio members should be seated on the side. Okay? They should be seated on the side. You're the chairman, you're sharing the meeting. Now, what happens with a thing like this, listening to the discussion, all these highly talented people on the planning board barely said a word. And one person just dominated the discussion. We can't have that. Ridgewood has so much talent in it, so many talented people. I want people to come up and come up with ideas. I want arguments, if you will. I want discussions, if you will. This is how good ideas develop. Having one person dominate a discussion is not the way to go. And you owe it to Ridgewood, Mr. Joel, for you to take charge of the meeting, to chair the meeting, and to make sure any ex-officio members sit on the side. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Anyone else have comments or questions?
Hi, Denise Lima, 319 East Glen Ave. Thank you for making this open to the public so we can hear and listen and contribute. I look forward to more workshops like we had in the first phase, where we can really get our sleeves up. I have one or two questions about a statistic I saw. Did you say that 9,000 residents leave Ridgewood for work? Yet we have about 19,000 adults. That sounded odd. Sounded like a low number. Then sounds like we would have more people staying in Ridgewood and more people probably should be in the downtown, and that's not really happening. So it was kind of a weird number for me. Yeah. The second thing was, I'm looking at the statistic that said we have all of these accidents, yet was it the same roads that we decided that you're recommending to expand for bicycles and pedestrians and walkways? So to me, that would be counterintuitive. I would probably stay away from those areas because they're probably not safe. But maybe the way that you're projecting on what we're going to do on the recommendations would work. I didn't hear you say that there was accidents on East Glen Ave, but if you look at the road, and I think that's probably true. I don't really recall a lot of accidents there. But what's happening is it's a straightaway from Maple Ave to 17. There's no stop signs. There's nothing to slow down commuters. And once they get through that light at Maple Ave, they hit 60 as they're getting to Route 17. And we have delicatessens, people crossing, and 2 schools. So I didn't see it, and I might have missed that exercise, but I didn't see a dot back there on Glen Ave. And while there's not accidents, I would just say we want to be proactive and probably do something now, not wait for there to be an accident or a death and a fatality. But I think there's a lot of conversation about East Glen Ave today.
So speaking to why there are recommendations on the roads where there are already crashes, the fact that there are crashes is that those roads are being used for people to walk and bike, and those are important connectors. By improving biking and walking along those roads, you are in effect making it safer for people to walk and bike. If you start sending people on local roads, they will never use those.
Got it.
Those are the direct connections to key destinations.
Right.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Those are direct connections to key destinations. And for example, if you add a bike lane, you are narrowing the road that automatically forces cars to slow down.
Right.
You widen the sidewalk. No one has to walk on the shoulder.
I saw in Englewood where they disallowed parking on either side of the street. So Glen Ave would be no parking either way. And they built a narrow medium and planted bushes and trees down the road to slow the traffic. Same concept. We're talking about bumping out the sidewalk, but they actually put I think it's Palisade Ave. They put a little narrow section there for shrubs. So, just
there are different strategies that work for different roadways. Some places if you say I'm going to take away parking, everyone's going to, have a fit. So, and then what was the second question?
We were just talking about Glen Ave, just in general, as of.
Yeah, no, I think I did mention Glen Ave for crashes, and yeah.
Okay. Hohokus, master plan, 210 pages, was just done in October of 2020. So when you're bored and have nothing to do and feel like reading 210 pages, take a gander at it. And I wasn't part of the original, I was away on vacation, but I'm trying to understand your scope of what's next, and maybe you kind of mentioned it down here. So there's a lot of considerations and observations, and then you're going to make recommendations. Are those recommendations, after they're redlined and whatnot, do they just get plopped into the master plan and like that's it? Like that's, or they're recommendations and you're gonna swirl around with, do we wanna do this, not do this, what should be actually in the master plan? Or whatever they come up with as recommendations becomes our final master plan. Like we're not gonna have another version, another phase of this, right? This is it? Or how do you see it happening?
Hi, Ms. Lima.
Hi.
So what happens is the state has given a charge to the town to come up with a master plan. So what we have to do, and no one on the planning board is really an expert, at least there might be a couple, but nobody's an expert in master planning of a town, right? So they're mostly volunteers that are working on this. So that, but at the same time, the state says you got to do this.
Right.
So we hire professionals to guide us, right? And then they give us recommendations. They're the experts, and it's an evolutionary process. So that's why this is going to take almost a full year to get completed.
Right, but at the end, the recommendation will just be our final master plan. Like, I guess I thought NV5 was going to do the similar. Like, after that phase, we were going to have a master plan. But
Yeah.
they did observations, right, and it wasn't a master plan at all. So I
Right.
just want to be clear, the end result of what we're paying them for is a final master plan.
Yes, but it's arrived at with it's a community-based decision, really, because these are the representatives of the community that are going to have very serious input into
Yeah.
what the final plan will be. I have had the pleasure or the terror of working on another master plan in another town as a planning board attorney, so I've been through this. It's
not easy.
It's not always a pleasant process, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot going on, there's a lot of moving parts, but we have the folks here to give us the structure, the skeleton framework of what we have to do, and then these people are gonna, these volunteers for the town, they're gonna have to coalesce it all and put it all together into a master plan that they think is the best shot for the future of Ridgewood based upon, you know, the community standards and what the people want. So it's not like they're going to come up with a plan and say, okay, here's where you guys all sign it. It's going to be a cooperative effort that'll last months, and that's why we've laid it out in the scheduling that, you know, there probably won't be anything really written till March or so. Is that fair? Or January?
February.
Yeah, okay. So it's an undertaking, but
Yeah.
fortunately, as I said, we have the professionals that have done this many times before and know what they're doing, and they will come to the board and give them the recommendations, and the board will kick it around.
It's
And
good that
then-
you're explaining that, thank you, because I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of question out there
It is,
on
it's
what
a
this phase
complicated process,
really
but
is.
remember, it's forced on us by the state, so we have to do it.
And my last question is, there's nothing radically surprising in what we're talking about. And somebody mentioned forward thinking or creative. We really have to think out of the box. We really have to think 5 and 10 years out. And that's not easy. Not everybody is a good entrepreneur and product development manager and can think like that. Not everybody's going to develop an iPhone. I mean, it's really difficult to do that. But that's where maybe getting other people, residents in town, you know, in workshops to really just be wildly creative and throw stuff on the wall, and maybe 2 things will stick, but we really have to think differently because, as you said, how many years are we behind from the last master plan? And so we're not even yet, and we still gotta like leap. We have to leap over that is my my quest for all of you. And thank you for what you're doing.
Okay, thanks, Denise.
Just to add to that, this, as was said, this will result in a new master plan document that replaces what has come before. We have a number of kind of patched together documents that have come out over the years. You know, last full master plan was done in 1983. And this is the second phase of what is now, what will at the end of it be a 3.5 year long process. The vision plan process that you mentioned, and Roshan is from NV5, so there's that continuity with the team. I wasn't there at the beginning, but I'm here now. That vision plan process is informing all of this. You know, we're not trying to go back and go through all of those things again because we spent valuable time, everyone's valuable time getting to this point. Now we're kind of drilling down on the requirements, what the state imposes as the requirements, and coming up with those recommendations that then everyone here in this room will have a chance to vet and decide what's best for the town.
Sorry, I just want to answer one more question. So the map at the back is meant to be an interactive exercise for everyone who's here to put a dot where you think, pick one location that you think is important to improve walking and biking and let us know why. And also, the same question, if you follow Village Ridgewood Master Plan website, we have weekly poll questions, and that one also has, it's the same question that we are asking, you know, where in town, where in the village do you want to improve walking and biking, and why?
Yeah, your question says one intersection.
Yes.
Yeah, well.
We need help, right? And you know, you can happy to. You can, yeah. Oh, okay. Are all 60 from you? And then sorry. Oh. I do want to address your question about crossings. There is no rule out there that you have to mark a crosswalk a specific way or you have to mark it at all. That is something that the roadway owner decides that this is where we want to mark it and this is how we're going to put 2 stripes or we're going to do zebra crossing, continental striping. That's sort of decided by the owner of the.
Okay. Any other questions from the public? Okay, just state your name and address.
Good evening, Bob Upton, 172 West Glen Avenue. I also am chair of Greenwich with the Environmental Committee. And this follows on nicely from Denise's comment that all the while you're discussing this process, I'm thinking to myself that most people are not looking further than today's problems, and the difficulty is looking way down the road with whatever technologies and issues are going to evolve. I just wanted to bring to your attention that one of the hot topics with our environmental committee at the moment is sustainable yard maintenance. And you've touched on this with irrigation issues and the like for reducing water consumption. But beyond what people are doing today, what you might consider best practices, smart irrigation, the move to electric lawnmowers for less energy consumption, and concerns with chemical treatments on plants which get into the water system. I would just encourage you to look further down the road and in your considerations for the plan, look at maybe some of the unpopular decisions that might have to be made in the future. You talked about plastic bag bans and things like that, which I'm sure were unpopular with a lot of people, but necessary. We're looking at food waste at the moment, maybe necessitating separation of food waste. And down the road, I don't know whether we're going to need to mandate. One of the issues that comes up in sustainable yard maintenance, one of the organizations refers to what they call plastic landscaping, that everybody wants their property to look immaculate with acres of perfect lawn. And maybe sustainably, we're not going to be able to do this in the future. So will we need to consider ordinances where we restrict the amount of lawn that people can have, or something like that, or pose restrictions on properties, rethink what a residential front yard, backyard are going to look like for the future. So I just want to throw that out as something for you to consider in your longer-term considerations. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else have questions or comments? Okay, state your name and address.
It's me. My name is Paul Marcosian. I live at 360 Gilbert Street, floor number 2. And I'm also a small business owner in downtown Ridgewood for about 20 years. My main concern is I think everything evolves, whether it's conservatism, whether it's recycling, whether it's perspective as far as how things should be run, or any other aspect of any kind of society. It's constant evolution. My greater vision as far as what Ridgewood looks like, let's say, I understand we might have a difficulty visioning things 5-10 years down the road, but I can tell you what it looks like 30 years down the road if you want me to. I mean, I see a lot greener Ridgewood. I'm mainly concerned with downtown area, central business district, and would love to see better maintenance, more pedestrian friendly, a little bit more greenery, and a better maintenance of that greenery as far as the tree wells go, and making it a little bit more pedestrian friendly. And you know what? If you make an area that is somewhat pleasant to everybody who comes or lives there, I think there's a better chance of having it preserved and conserved. I mean, we're kind of coming up with new technologies constantly. At one point, we're stepping away from the industrial segment of our society, going into electronics or technology, and then I think there's still room for evolution. But the whole idea is to make Ridgewood as preserved and as pedestrian friendly as possible. I mean, I don't think it's a rocket science to make all these things work. And you know what? We can have a lot of experts and a lot of very good people in our council that could make better recommendations. On a very grassroots level, me, myself, and a lot of my community members will be more than happy to volunteer to make those small changes happen. And as far as what we had, as far as questions, as far as the downtown area, like I said, my main concern is the central business district, and I walk that road maybe a lot of times, you know, quite a couple of thousand miles at least. So I would say that make few minor changes besides making it very friendly and very pedestrian friendly and making it green and making it pleasant so everybody would appreciate it and they would contribute towards that preservation. There are minor things that could be done as far as the crosswalks to make it pedestrian friendly and making it a little bit safe, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming change. And I know people they're not very happy with overwhelming changes. They need small increments, you know. So simple speed bumps, simple friendly crossing guards at a very high dense times, density pedestrian times whenever, let's say on a weekend, somebody friendly who can come over and direct traffic, man, where make everybody welcome to Ridgewood. I think it's just small things that need to happen to make a big difference. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay. All right, thanks, Paul. Any other questions, comments? Okay. All right, so that'll Did you have anything to say to wrap up at all, or?
No, I think we heard a lot of good stuff this evening, and I know I've got several pages of notes here, and grist for the mill. So we'll look forward to putting together some draft ideas and being back here again January 18th. Hopefully we'll no weather issues or anything like that, but we'll see you all again then, and we'll certainly be in touch. And please do check the ridgewoodvilлагemp.org website, where there will be consistent updates. Our questions of the week will be continuing to broadcast and disseminate those. We've gotten some great responses so far, and hope to continue to hear from everyone. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Richard, can I just say two things just based on kind of what I've heard from the public?
Sure.
So just a couple things. So I think there was maybe 6 folks that came up to speak, and 4 of them spoke on sustainability, not to mention my fellow board members that have done that. Could you guys potentially look, I know we're in New Jersey, could you potentially look at the state of California and like towns, their best practices in a lot of corporate organizations on things that they've done with sustainability? So although we might not have a beach next to us, right, but there may be some really good ideas that come out of things that are done in similar communities in California. So that would just be my first comment, and I know that we look at them even in like the workplace, right? And then my second comment would be, and I'm sure you're gonna look into this for circulation, and what did you call the bubble speed humps? That you called them something. The speed cushions. So
speed cushions.
Speed cushions. But there's also, I think people sometimes as they're driving, and again, I don't know what our ordinance is, but the thing that says you're going this and slow down, I've noticed them a lot more, even in Hawthorne, like they've been putting these up in some of the thoroughfares, like one of the residents spoke about on East Glen. And sometimes when you just see that, and it's like you're going 33 miles an hour in a 25, you're like, oh, you hit the brake. And not to mention if you're going faster than that, right? Sometimes just that reminder, like, hey, hello, slow down, is sometimes a really good thing to do. So while I agree that the speed cushions definitely make you stop, I also think that flashing light has the same effect. I know it's worked on me in the mornings, and I'm like, oh, I'm going 33 and it's 25, and I'm just not looking down at the speedometer, but just one of those things, and I'm sure you're gonna look at that on your circulation plans, but I've noticed them popping up a lot more, especially in and around Bergen County as of recently.
Okay, Debbie, you'll be getting your speeding ticket in the mail.
Sorry, it was 33. Wait, where was that, Deb? Where?
Thanks, John and Roshana, for the presentation. I'd like to thank the board and our subcommittee also, and our professionals and the public. I mean, it's really an interactive process, so keep involved, check the website, show up, and we're going to get this done and eventually have a nice master plan at the end of it. All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, our next item will be discussion regarding amended H District Amendment. All right, whenever you're ready, Beth, welcome back.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. Just for the record, I'm Beth McManus. I do a lot of your affordable housing and dealing with the Valley Hospital in their H-zone changes actually falls within the category of affordable housing for some complicated reasons, but nonetheless, that's what we're here to discuss. So, as I think was previewed a couple of weeks ago when I appeared before the planning board, before all of you, there are two things happening right now with the Valley Hospital property. And tonight I'm here to discuss one of them specifically. But just more broadly, those two items are first, adjusting the underlying H-zone district, and that's what we're going to talk about specifically tonight. And then the second is adopting a redevelopment plan for that same site. That redevelopment plan would function as an overlay. It would be an option for development. And so the ordinance that we're going to talk about this evening and then the future redevelopment plan are not working at cross purposes. And in fact, they're specifically intended to layer upon each other, where we've got the underlying zoning, and that gives certain rights to the developer. But as an option, a developer can utilize the future redevelopment plan, which we can talk about a little bit if folks like, but we're still a couple steps away from really getting into that. But I wanted to introduce the idea because I know it's a little complicated, quite frankly. So with that, in terms of the H-zone district, as many of you may know, the reason why we're talking about this tonight and the reason why it's before the village generally is because of litigation that goes back now about 5 years or so. The very short and abbreviated story is the village had a development application from the Valley Hospital. That development application was denied. It went up through the courts, and ultimately we have a court decision and a settlement agreement between the village and the hospital that sets forth certain actions that needed to take place. The most significant action, at least in terms of the planning board, is really just rezoning the property to better accommodate for that existing hospital use, and then a couple of other changes as well that we'll talk about. And so, just to be clear, the settlement agreement was done in 2016, I believe. It had about a 90-day window for when we're supposed to do this zoning. Obviously, we're a little bit delayed, but that seems to be okay. We're moving forward now. We're going to get this done without the need for any future litigation. Knock on wood, right? So the settlement agreement, as well as the judge's order, requires that essentially the village update this existing H-zone to simply permit in total the existing facility and allow a couple of additional uses. And so that's what this ordinance is intended to do. So the first thing, if you take a look at the first page of the ordinance, is it identifies a couple of additional uses that need to be incorporated into the list of permitted uses for the hospital. So the hospital previously permitted just 3 uses, and predominantly just one. It was the hospital, obviously. Also permitted child care centers, and then it also included municipal buildings owned or leased. But in addition to those 3 items, this ordinance adds healthcare related services such as urgent care, behavioral health, diagnostic imaging, laboratory services, etc., also nursing homes. It also adds assisted living. And then lastly, it allows senior residential development as long as those senior units include an affordable housing set aside. And so these are the 3 uses that the village had committed to incorporating. The other uses, the other changes of the ordinance are all included within the bulk and the lot regulations. And there are a variety of things, a variety of changes, but fundamentally, what it's intended to do is to say to the hospital or any future developer of these health-related uses and the additional ones I just listed, your existing conditions essentially need to be maintained. That means the front yard and other setbacks need to be maintained. It means the floor area ratio, which is basically the floor area of the complex, needs to be maintained, and the building heights need to be maintained in the sense that existing building heights must be maintained. And there is a line in here or an item for any new buildings. And those new buildings are actually have a maximum building height at the building height that exists in the ordinance today. So 48 feet plus an additional 17 feet for rooftop structures. In addition, one of the other important components of this, I think, is maximum building coverage by above-grade structures, and that too is an existing condition. So what you see in here is rather than a specific setback, like, for example, 43.23 feet or 38.5 feet, instead it simply states for the front yard setback is not less than the existing setback. So it requires that these existing standards essentially be maintained should the property owner or future developer redevelop the site consistent with the H zone. And I want to be clear that the H zone just governs any healthcare related use. When I come back in the future to talk about redevelopment, we'll have a whole different set of standards to go with a whole different set of uses to talk about. So the ordinance is just a couple pages long, but it's, as I said at the outset, it's really intended to take what they have today and legalize it. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions folks may have.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Beth on this?
Hi, how are you, Beth? So I just had a quick question on under B, number 4, facilities providing power to uses located on the site. So is there any, so that's not there currently. That would be new.
What the standard, I think you mean the physical power plant. I don't believe there's been a new power plant generated on the site. I know that they certainly have power generating equipment and infrastructure on the property. But this standard, this permitted accessory use, facilities providing power, is simply an existing accessory use that's intended to simply be maintained pursuant to the court direction, but there's no new standards required in order to regulate it differently.
Okay. So I was just concerned about noise, if they had new power. Like, is part of the ordinance already, is there a noise regulation?
There's no noise standard specific to your H-zone district. However, there are state noise standards that any development must comply with, including the H-zone or anything in the H-zone. And then in addition to that, Ridgewood also has performance standards that regulate things like vibration. It may also regulate noise. I don't know off the top of my head, but it deals with other types of performance issues. Most notably, or most relevant perhaps, is vibration, and those would be applicable to the H zone, just like those state noise standards are.
Okay, all right. And then I have one other question then on, I guess it's line 67. It says maximum coverage by improvements, 90% of the lot area. Is that what is currently there, 90%?
Their current lot coverage is almost 90%. I believe it's within a percentage point of that.
Okay. All right. That was it. Thank you.
Does this, what Lorraine was just asking about the facilities for power, so isn't most of it currently located underground or?
Within the building, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this permits some additional outdoor or outside structures that could be built as long as they fit within these guidelines, don't go over the lot coverage. So like there could just all of a sudden be a generator building at the back end of this.
Yes, if they keep within the standards. So for example, that means they'd be limited to height, they would be limited to all the setbacks, and they would be limited to the coverage requirements.
So where a parking lot currently exists, backing up to a residential neighborhood, could theoretically now, provided it met with the setbacks, which certainly are not as great as the parking lot would be, could suddenly be a building housing something like that, right? Within nominal, certainly if that was any of our houses, we wouldn't want a building like that backing up to that. So that possibility exists.
I can't say that it doesn't. The reality is, unfortunately, our hands are tied pretty tightly with what we can regulate in this H-zone district, given the court's decision.
Well, I think it says in here, the front yard, side yard, so they can't push it back into a corner.
No, but I mean, it could be certainly a lot closer to a backyard or someone's home than it is now,
Yeah,
if
but
they're.
it's not going to move out without the confines it is now, is what I'm saying. I mean, it might be relocated
Right.
within, but again, I guess there's town ordinances and things like that.
Okay.
I think you answered this, but I just wanted to confirm, and also there's a small typo. On the second page, number 6, its maximum floor area ratio. Is 84% what is currently there? Because that's a huge bump up from 65.
It is roughly 84%. I can give you that number
Okay.
in just a moment.
Can I ask a really, maybe a rudimentary question? So every time we say that we are basically making that, this is to make them compliant with what's happening there now. When did they become non-compliant with what's I'm missing like that piece. How is it that it's not compliant? Or, I mean, it's just, I think I'm just literally missing some, like, you're saying that we're adopting this in order to keep the uses compliant.
In order to we're adopting this in order to, sort of the opposite. We are adopting this in order to make the zoning consistent with what's out there. Does that answer your question?
out
with
there.
what is on the site currently.
Right. And the
I
zoning
think
isn't.
what she's getting to
I'm
is
sorry.
there were variances before. That's why it's higher now. Is that what you're getting at?
I guess so. I guess I never
You're
realized.
seeing numbers here that are much lower, and you're wondering why
Different.
they're higher now.
Yeah,
But
so
there
for
were-
the lot cover, the maximum coverage, item 5 is a good example of that. So the existing ordinance permits 16%, and it's going up to the existing as of the date of the ordinance, which is 44%.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I have 2 questions. And I know Robin's here. She was there in 2016, as was I. So it's always good to see her. So my recollection is that we were to get a drawing of the existing power plant or that power room underneath. Do you recall that, Beth?
There is some language, let's see.
Is that in the?
It says, and I'm just going to pull a sentence out of the settlement agreement. It says, once TVH advises the village and the planning board of the dimensions and height of the power plant, the planning board will then consider whether to further amend the master plan to recommend additional ordinance amendments to allow for the construction of it. And so
I
there's
don't
been no.
believe we ever received that information, and I think that don't we need that? It's relevant to this.
I think it's relevant if we're going to include new ordinance amendments to permit a bigger, larger, or power plant that would otherwise violate some of these standards. But TVH has never advised of a proposed power plant and our intention to construct that on the property and the need for alternative ordinance standards for it.
Okay. Then am I misunderstanding something on this? Let me just say. Hang on a minute. Well, let me get to my other question while I'm looking for that. On any rooftop mechanicals where we have a 48-foot height and then an ability to go 17 feet high, is there any screening imposed on that? Okay.
No, not specific to the H district. I don't know that the village has design standards elsewhere in the ordinance that would be applicable to this.
Wait, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. There's no screening requirements set forth in the H zone. If the village has other screening requirements elsewhere in the ordinance, say design standards that would be applicable to all zones or perhaps non-residential uses, those would apply.
Okay. Does somebody else have questions while I'm looking for my little line here? I noted it before.
Anyone else have any questions?
I think I'm good for now.
What's the status? Is this a referral from the council to us, or just?
No, not yet. This is just simply an opportunity for the planning board to more informally review the ordinance, make any recommendations for the council to consider prior to introduction. And then this would come back to the planning board for the formal referral and master plan consistency.
Okay, I just want to go back to that B4 item, facilities providing power to uses located on the site. My recollection is that the reason we requested that document was as a foundation to understand B4.
I can't speak to the history of that item. I can only tell you what I see memorialized in the settlement agreement, unfortunately.
Can you speak to that? Yeah, can Robin speak to that? Just, I need a memory refresher, I'm sorry.
Oops, you might want to just come up, just state your name, and just for the record.
Robin Goldfisher, I'm the Senior Vice President and General Counsel for the Valley Health System. It's my recollection that we did provide some plans or some information on the power plant, but it's been so long that I don't recall. I can go back and check the files.
Okay. All right.
I do know that there was nothing that was determinative because we haven't made any plans for what we could need in the future. So what we were just telling you about was what existed today.
Right.
And that's why we had the tail language in the settlement agreement about power plant of the future.
So just for the record, can you get a copy of that forwarded, I guess, to Matt Rogers? Would that?
I can go through the file and
Thank
see
you.
What we may have sent in the past. Yeah, that's not a problem. If anything.
Yeah,
I do
thanks,
remember
because
what
I
we
just,
said
I
in the file.
remember that so clearly from that whole conversation with the judge, so it would be appreciated if
No
you have
problem.
that available. Thank you.
Okay.
So, any other questions? So I guess if we were going to do a letter to the council, I guess we would just mention screening the mechanicals, check sound ordinances, the drawing for the existing power plant, and location of the power plant would be the main items, I guess.
Yes, and there was a question from maybe Ms. O'Brien asking me what the existing floor area ratio on the site was, and it is 84%, consistent with what the ordinance says.
Good.
Okay. All right. Jane, can you do a letter on that to the council? Okay. All right, thanks. I have the list. All right. Okay. No more questions? All right. Thank you, Beth.
My pleasure. Have a good night, folks.
Okay, you too. Okay, our next item will be adoption of minutes, October 5, 2021. Those that were present, please review them and see if there's any revisions. If not, we'll take a motion. Okay, does anyone want to make a motion on these minutes?
I'll make the motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Melanie seconded. Call the roll for approval of the minutes as written.
Mayor Knudsen?
Yes.
Councilman Reynolds?
Yes.
Mr. Joel?
Yes.
Ms. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Huban?
Yes.
Mr. Lebarsky?
Yes.
And Mr. Allegra?
Okay, the minutes are approved. And we have no need for an executive session, I assume.
No.
Okay. Do we have any further business or questions from the board? Do we have a motion to conclude our meeting? All right, Melanie
I'll second
moved,
it.
and second from
You
Diane.
did it
All in
exactly.
favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, we're concluded. Thank you very much.
Look at that, 10:05 on the dot.
Great job, thank you.
Nailed it, 10:05 on the dot.
Diane thought we had an hour left.
Isn't that ironic? Huh? Perfect Swiss timing.